My son forgot to hang up after we finished talking about Thanksgiving. I almost set the phone down when his voice came back over the line. They don't suspect a thing. Christina laughed and said, "Rich old people are always the easiest to kidnap." I felt the room tilt. It was Thursday afternoon. After 35 years of mothering David, you'd think I'd have learned to end a call properly. But there I was, standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my own child plan my abduction. At first I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe a terrible prank. "David, are you still there?" I asked. No answer. Then footsteps, Christina's voice clear, as if she were in the same room. This was the woman with the perfect smile and designer bags. My daughter-in-law, Christina, talking about drugging and moving me. About sending a ransom note from my own email so it looked like professionals had targeted Harold's widow. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. They spoke in chillingly practical terms. Dissolve pills in her wine. She'll be out in 30 minutes. Move her to the cabin. Send the ransom note to herself. If she doesn't pay, make it look like the kidnappers got impatient, tragic accident. The words hit me harder than anything I'd ever imagined hearing from my child. David, who once brought me dandelions and called them flowers, was plotting to drug and abduct me for money. Christina's voice had an edge now. I'd noticed creeping into her manner in the past year calculation where there had once been warmth. I didn't stay frozen for long. Harold hadn't simply left me money. He'd left me resources, including a business contact tucked away in a drawer, James Rodriguez, a private investigator who'd handled delicate matters for Harold's business. I called him within the hour. Rodriguez Investigations answered like a steady hand. I introduced myself, Margaret Thompson, Harold's widow, and asked for help. He remembered Harold and agreed to meet. When I hung up, something inside me shifted. The terror and disbelief were being replaced by a hard, lucid resolve. I'd kept Harold's accounts and run parts of his work for decades. Planning was in my bones. If David and Christina thought they could turn a widow into prey, they'd misjudged me. James met me that night in a quiet downtown coffee shop. He wasn't the rumpled cliché I'd expected. He was neat, mid-50s, in a crisp suit, calm and professional. He recorded our meeting November 15th, 2025, initial consultation with Margaret Thompson, and asked me to tell him everything I'd heard. I recounted the call, every line, and watched his expression move from businesslike interest to real concern. He asked the hard questions. How much money? When was Thanksgiving? How confident was I that what I'd heard was real? Harold had left me roughly $2.8 million plus the house and investments. Thanksgiving was set for Thursday, November 23rd, at my home. James said that gave us time to gather proof, set surveillance, and prepare. He also warned me that recording evidence would change things irrevocably. Relationships could be destroyed. I thought of David laughing about staging an accident. My grief for Harold was real, but the betrayal from my own son felt like a second wound. I told James I wanted to proceed. His plan was methodical. Background checks on David and Christina, financial and phone records, hidden cameras and audio devices installed in my home, legal when it's your own property, and careful documentation of everything they did leading up to Thanksgiving. He emphasized secrecy. No one else could know, or the operation would be compromised. He handed me a secure cell phone and told me to call him immediately if anything felt wrong. For the first time since Harold's funeral 3 years ago, I felt a purpose. They thought they were hunting a helpless widow. What they didn't know was that she had allies, a plan, and the will to turn the tables. Tonight we would begin. The next morning I sat up determined. I knew David's habits after 35 years. I practically had his schedule memorized, so I called him at 9, right after his first cup of coffee. I kept my voice light and domestic, confirming Thanksgiving details, and casually nudging him to come earlier, at 2 instead of 4. He hesitated, then agreed. If they were planning something, extra hours at my house would be a bonus for them. For me, it would be an opportunity to gather evidence. At 11, I drove to David's workplace, a car dealership where he kept a respectable face while his income could swing wildly. I brought his favorite deli lunch and used the pretense of dropping it off to slip into his office. He hadn't told his coworkers I was coming. The office was small, awards on the wall, family photos on his desk. I opened a drawer and found what I'd feared: bank and credit card statements. His accounts were hemorrhaging withdrawals of thousands, a savings account that had been healthy months earlier now overdrawn, and credit card debt totaling around $67,000. With charges at casinos. My heart sank. David walked in then. I lied smoothly about needing a pen and acting as if I'd simply opened the drawer by chance. He deflected, blamed work stress, and returned to his calls. I left, but called James on the secure phone as soon as I reached the car. The numbers fit a dangerous picture, debts the type of collectors don't accept late payments from. James asked the crucial question: would that change how I felt about what my son intended? It didn't. Desperation might explain him, but it didn't excuse him. That afternoon, James sent a file that made my hands go cold. Christina's past marriages had ended under suspicious circumstances. 2 husbands dead within months of marriage, large insurance payouts, investigations closed as accidents. The dates, the policies, the patterns. It looked less like bad luck and more like a carefully executed pattern. She'd married, profited, moved on. The idea that she might be a professional at making husbands and their families disappear was terrifying. As evening fell, James called again with surveillance results. My home phone had been probed calls that rang once and hung up, repeated at odd hours. Someone was checking to see if I was home. He recommended I leave. I refused. This was my house. If they wanted to commit their scheme here, we'd catch them here. The cameras he planned to install were already in place. We had audio and visual coverage of the main floor. He warned, stern. If they escalated, he'd be on site in 15 minutes, and police response would take longer. I insisted we press on. I decided to force their hand. Instead of waiting a week, I would suggest moving Thanksgiving up, provoking them to act sooner and, ideally, make mistakes. It was risky. James worried they'd accelerate to murder. I weighed the danger against the chance to catch them red-handed. I called David, put on a frail, lonely tone, and said I'd been dizzy and would prefer to have dinner the next night instead. He consulted Christina and called back with practiced cheer. Tomorrow at 6 was perfect. Their ease chilled me, but confirmed the timeline. James moved into emergency mode, telling me that backup protocols were in place and that he'd monitor everything from a nearby van. He insisted I wear a panic button and check in hourly starting at 5. That night I did what I rarely did. I told my sister Patricia something true but incomplete. If anything happened to me, make sure the police investigate until they find the truth. I sealed a letter explaining everything and tucked it away for Patricia to open, only if the worst came to pass. Late that night, James reported a new complication. Marcus Richardson, Christina's brother, was in town. His phone records showed calls with David and Christina. Marcus owned property suitable for holding someone. The conspiracy was larger than I'd thought. When someone starts pulling in outside help, you're no longer dealing with a moment of weakness. You're confronting an organized operation. Still, I chose to gamble. If we could get them confessing, talking about debts and motives on tape, we'd have what the police needed. James reminded me the glucose tablets were only a temporary countermeasure to sedatives, and that I would have a narrow window of clear-headedness if I had to use them. I slept badly, but with a focus I hadn't felt in years. We were moving from defense to offense, and I would not be a passive target. I woke early the next morning, the day everything would come to a head. The fear was still there, but sharpened into something closer to clarity. James called around noon with news that stiffened my spine. Marcus Richardson had checked into a hotel 20 minutes away. They were preparing. They weren't just reckless, they were confident. At 4, I began setting the dining table with my best china, the anniversary set Harold had given me. If this was going to be my last dinner, as they intended, I wanted them to see exactly what they had tried to destroy. By 5, James was fully set up outside, surveillance active, emergency responders on standby. At 5:30, I took the glucose tablets and hid the empty bottle. At 5:50, headlights swept across my window. David and Christina, early. Funny how punctual people become when a crime depends on it. They entered my home with bright smiles, yellow roses, and a bottle of expensive wine, excellent for masking whatever sedatives waited inside. If I hadn't known their intentions, I might have thought they were simply thoughtful, but Christina avoided my eyes, and David's cheerfulness had that hollow ring of a man performing a role. We moved into the kitchen, and I began my subtle work. I asked about finances, lightly, as though it were the concern of a mother planning her estate. Their guarded glances told me I'd touched a nerve. Christina smoothed the topic with ease. She was skilled at lying sweetly, but when I offered them financial help, David looked painfully tempted. Christina shut him down with a single look. We sat in the dining room. David uncorked the wine. We toasted to family. The first sip tasted slightly bitter. Whether from tannins or poison, I couldn't yet tell. Christina refilled my glass again and again, overflowing with affection. I felt the sedatives creeping in my vision, softening at the edges, my pulse slowing. The glucose tablets bought me some time, but not much. I steered the conversation quickly to debts, to responsibility, to whether they could handle an inheritance, their story, unexpected medical bills, lies polished to a shine. Then came the pitch, assisted living, a facility, somewhere I'd be tucked away, out of sight, while they helped manage the property. They wanted control. They wanted rights to my life. The dizziness hit hard. My hands trembled. I feel a bit tired, I murmured. Christina offered sympathy wrapped in poison. Just a little nap, Margaret. David stood, leaving his chair like a dutiful son and coming to my side. This was the moment. While he helped me up, I pressed the panic button in my pocket 3 quick taps. James would be moving. David's arm around me felt colder than ice. Let's just get you comfortable, Mom. The living room blurred. I let myself slump onto the couch, letting my body mimic the weakness creeping through my limbs. I felt like a marionette whose strings had been cut. She's out, Christina said flatly. All softness vanished. David checked my pulse with clinical detachment. Heart rate's dropping. How much did you give her? Double dose, Christina replied. We don't have time for mistakes. They discussed logistics like movers, talking about a sofa, my email, the ransom message, timing, transport to the cabin, what to stage as signs of struggle. Then the door opened, and a man entered without knocking. Marcus Richardson, built like a threat, heavy boots, emotionless eyes. Is she under? He asked. Completely, Christina said. He checked my pulse himself. Good. Let's move her. That was their biggest mistake. Outside, a van engine vibrated faintly. Christina gathered my purse. David fetched my coat. Marcus planned their timing to avoid suspicion. But David paused. Did you hear that? Car doors! More than one! Christina dismissed him. Marcus rolled his eyes. And then, the front door exploded open. James Rodriguez entered first, badge out, uniformed officers behind him, tactical gear and weapons raised. Police! Everyone on the ground, now! Chaos broke like glass. Marcus lunged toward the back door and met 2 more officers. Christina tried to switch back to her sweet daughter-in-law act, claiming I was having a medical emergency. James shut her down with one sentence. We have everything on tape, Christina. David stood frozen, his world collapsing in seconds. As the officers cuffed them, I sat up slowly, letting them see me awake. David stared at me like I'd risen from the dead. Mom, how? Glucose tablets, I said. You really should research that before your next poisoning attempt. Christina hissed profanity at me, mask gone. Marcus spat threats as officers dragged him out. I only smiled gently. Language. We have company. One by one, they were taking away my son, my daughter-in-law, and the man they'd brought to destroy me. And for the first time in years, I felt completely alive. When the police cars finally disappeared down the street, their lights fading into the dark, the house fell into a silence, so complete it almost rang in my ears. For hours, the place had been filled with plotting, deception, and the kind of betrayal you don't fully feel until you're alone with it. Now there was nothing but the faint, tick of the clock on the wall and the half-finished dinner on the table, a strange monument to the night my own family tried to destroy me. James stayed to review recordings and gather physical evidence. When he eventually left, promising detectives would contact me in the morning, the house seemed to breathe differently. I poured myself a fresh glass of the Bordeaux, this time from an unopened bottle, and sat in Harold's old armchair. The wine tasted better without sedatives. At exactly 10, the secure phone rang. "Mrs. Thompson," James said, his voice low and steady. "How are you holding up?" "Remarkably well," I said. "Considering I just had my son arrested for trying to kidnap me." He told me the district attorney wanted a meeting the next morning. The surveillance had captured everything, every whispered plan, every incriminating detail. Authorities were particularly interested in Christina's references to her previous husbands. With the new evidence, old cases were being reopened. Entire investigations might be rewritten. "James," I asked quietly, "do they think she actually murdered those men?" "There's a good chance, Mrs. Thompson. Both deaths had red flags, now they have context." He hesitated before mentioning David. "His cooperation could reduce his sentence, if he chooses to testify. It's his decision." When he asked what I thought my son should do, my heart twisted in that old familiar ache. The boy who once held my hand crossing the street had become a man capable of watching me die for money. Still, some part of me remembered him bringing me dandelions. I didn't give James an answer. After we hung up, I walked my house slowly. Every room felt familiar and foreign at once. This had been my safe place for years, yet tonight these walls had heard my son argue for my accidental death. I wondered if I'd ever see them the same way again. Then the doorbell rang. It was late, too late. My stomach dropped. I checked the peephole. A young woman with red hair stood on the porch. She looked nervous but determined. "Mrs. Thompson?" she said when I cracked the door with the chain still latched. "My name is Sarah Chen. I was married to Robert Chen before Christina." Her words hit me like a cold wind. Robert Chen. Christina's first husband. I kept the chain locked. "What do you want?" "To warn you," she said, her voice trembling. "And to thank you. I saw the arrests on the news. You don't know how long I've been waiting for someone to expose her. Against my better judgment, I let her in. Something about her eyes told me she wasn't there to harm me. She was there because she'd already been harmed by the same woman who'd tried to kill me." Sarah spoke with the desperation of someone who had carried a secret for far too long. "Robert was a good man," she said. "Flawed, but good. He had a gambling problem. That's how she found him." "She found him?" I repeated. Sarah nodded. "Christina worked at the casino he frequented. She targeted him, learned his habits, studied his weaknesses. She didn't just marry vulnerable men, she groomed them. She explained that after Robert died in a so-called home invasion, she'd hired her own investigator. The official story never sat right with her. And what she found was chillingly familiar. Christina's connection to casinos, to shadowy financial operations, to men who disappeared or died right after marrying her." Sarah pulled out a folder stuffed with clippings, printouts, police reports, 6 years' worth of quiet detective work done by a grieving widow. "This isn't just Christina," she said. "It's a whole network. Gambling debts, insurance fraud, staged accidents, kidnappings. They identify wealthy targets with vulnerabilities. People like your husband, people like you." I stared at the documents. So many families, so many patterns, so many tragedies that had seemed unfortunate until the pieces fell into place. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. "Mrs. Thompson, you stopping her tonight? It may have put a target on you. They don't forgive disruptions. They retaliate." I swallowed hard, not fear calculation. "What do you suggest?" I asked. Sarah took a slow breath, steadying herself. "That we go after all of them," she said. "Together. I've been collecting names, associates, banks, properties. If we don't dismantle the entire network, they'll just rebuild." She slid a list across my coffee table, addresses, shell companies, known operatives. It was a map of a hidden underworld, and I felt something awaken in me. Not fear, purpose. I thought of Harold's voice in my memory. The best defense is a good offense. Miss Chen, I said, lifting my chin. I think that's exactly what I'd be interested in. Some battles end at the arrest. Others begin right after. This one was just beginning. 3 weeks later, I sat in a federal courtroom as Marcus Richardson was sentenced to life without parole. 2 of his associates received the same. They showed no remorse, only rage that their profitable little empire had collapsed in one night. Christina's fate was worse. She'd already been convicted of 2 murders, Robert Chen and Marcus Williams, and tied to at least 6 other suspicious deaths. With the evidence Sarah Chen and I provided, she was found guilty on every count, including conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. The judge recommended the death penalty. David received 12 years. Because he cooperated, because he testified, because he finally told the truth. He wrote me letters from prison, long, emotional, apologetic. I stacked them in a drawer. I couldn't bring myself to read them. Not yet. Maybe one day. Sarah sat beside me at every hearing, every meeting, every debriefing. We had become an unlikely partnership, 2 women bonded not by blood, but by surviving the same predator. What began as my personal nightmare became the largest organized crime takedown in the state's history. 23 arrests, 14 convictions in the first wave alone. Over $40 million in stolen assets recovered. Families who thought they'd lost everything finally got restitution. Detective James Rodriguez shook my hand on the courthouse steps. Mrs. Thompson, he said, the FBI has officially closed the Richardson investigation. Thanks to you and Sarah, dozens of families are getting answers. And justice. I looked at Sarah, tired but proud. Justice mattered, but prevention mattered more. A week later, Sarah came to me with an idea: to create a consulting agency dedicated to investigating suspicious deaths, financial fraud, and elder exploitation. We knew the patterns. We had contacts in law enforcement. And we had personal motivation burning and permanent. We named our firm Second Chances Investigations. 6 months later, our office was thriving. 80% of our cases led to criminal charges. We recovered over $15 million for victims. People came to us scared, uncertain, and left with answers. One afternoon, in our new office with polished wooden floors and framed case files on the walls, my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach tighten. David Thompson State Correctional Facility, I answered. Hello, David. Hi, Mom. His voice was smaller than I remembered, softer. I've been hoping you would visit. I've been busy, I said, eyes drifting across our wall of successes, families restored, lives rebuilt. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he said. But I need to tell you something. Marcus had connections we didn't know about. People outside the family. People who don't like loose ends. What are you saying? I'm saying, be careful. Some of his associates don't let things go. They might come after you. Just promise me you'll stay alert. The irony almost made me smile. David, I said gently, you don't need to worry about me. After we hung up, Sarah approached. Everything all right? I looked around our office, panic buttons installed discreetly under every desk, a security consultant on payroll, reinforced doors, surveillance cameras, and a network of law enforcement allies who answered our calls within minutes. I'm fine, I said. But David thinks I've still got enemies. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Do you? Probably, I said. But if they come after me now, they're going to regret it. Sarah laughed. When I first met you, I thought you were a lucky old lady who survived a crime. Now, she shook her head in admiration. Now I think you're the most dangerous 70-year-old woman in America. Good, I said. Let them come. That evening, I returned to my home, now upgraded with security that would impress a military base. Cameras, sensors, alerts, reinforced locks. And in my nightstand, a firearm James recommended and taught me to use safely. I made dinner, watched the news, Went to bed early. A perfectly ordinary night. Except I wasn't ordinary anymore. I'd learned the most important lesson a woman can learn. Never let anyone decide you're an easy target. David once said rich old people are predictable, easy to fool, easy to trap. He was half right. Some are easy targets. Others become hunters. And if anyone from that shattered network wanted to test which kind I was, they were welcome to try. Thank you for letting me tell my story. And if you're ready, share yours in the comments.